There's a drawback to only wearing black shirts that inevitably, when I want to build something around the studio, which is all the time, you get messy and it doesn't look great on camera. Ignore it. One of the hardest things to figure out in the studio is compression. I mean, we naturally have an inclination of what to do with EQ. Do you want something brighter? Do you want something darker? Compression's a little bit of a different beast. You have different types of compressors, VCA, opto, FET compressors, all these different parameters that don't necessarily go with what we think they should go with: attack, release, threshold, input, output. Some of these have all of those options. Some of them don't. Not only that, when you get into the mathematics of what a compressor actually does, by the time you set the ratio and then how hard you're going into that compressor, you're not really doing that number, but it gets confusing. One of the things that helped me when I was learning things was researching different mastering compression styles, figuring out what popular songs were doing what with compression. I have a playlist on Spotify of nothing but slow release mastering releases. That's a mouthful, but what does a song sound like when it's slow release? What does a song sound like when it's fast release? And just training your ear to those songs. Of course, that's one way you can go about it. You can also find a mentor. You can go to audio school, which that's a whole different discussion for a whole different video. Somebody told me early on, you have to turn a knob or press a button 10,000 times before you really figure out what that button does. And it's definitely true. There's still pieces of this that I'm learning and relearning every single time I do a project. But if you don't have the time to wait for the opportunity to press that button 10,000 times, what are you gonna do? Now, I love to get in there and get my hands dirty, but I also love to lift things that are too heavy for one person to safely lift on a ladder. This thing's ready. Let's put it up. It's going right up there, up at the top. Oh! I did not think this through. Could have been worse. Oh yeah, it'll work. It needs light. I dig. I think we can make this work. So all that said, with compression settings, it's genuinely one of the hardest things to figure out. And one thing that helped me with it was buying a distressor, my first real compressor, because it could do so many different things. And hearing what those different things do, even though when you set it to do the LA2A thing, it might not be an LA2A, or you set it to do the 1176 thing, it might not be an 1176, but you can figure out what it is you like about compression, whether or not it's sonically perfect or not. What if there was another way to think about this, another way to learn, another kind of virtual engineer over your shoulder showing you what they might do with the source as a starting point, and then you can go from there. Enter Sonable. I'm sure this sounds like a sponsored video by Sonable, but it is not. They sent me this to try, but they are not sponsoring this video. However, this video is sponsored by Sweetwater, but more on that later. So here we are in Pro Tools. This session is not done. I had players come in. The vocals that are on this track are scratch vocals that the artist recorded with their phone. This is just an easy example that I can use to demonstrate some of these principles. Now, first off, let's talk about most of the time when engineers are talking about compression, we're talking about it in context of a sonic aspect that it adds. Most of the time, I want to toss an 1176 on vocals, and I'm not alone in that world, especially for things like rock music, pop music, where you want the vocal out in front, you want a little hair on it, you want it to be a little bit dirty. We're not necessarily reaching for the 1176 for the way it controls a sound, but what the sound that it imparts on a given source. An LA2A, much the same thing. It's not how it compresses. It's warm, gooey, sonic thing that it does. Where if you really want a super clean compressor, you could just pull up whatever you have stock and literally just get what you put in compressed. But a lot of times that's not what we want. And learning compression is even more convoluted. Sonable sent me their Smart Comp 2. They are not sponsoring this video, although they did give me that for free. You should know that. But I thought this was a really interesting way to illustrate a point on we can learn the different functions of a compressor using our eyes, because this plugin gives us feedback that some other plugins may approach, but you don't get all that feedback in any other plugin that I know of. Pro Comp 2 comes close. However, they are different. Let's take a look. So first off, this is a track that she recorded with her phone, just scratch, so we could have something in the room while we work. And I'm literally just gonna pull this track down to like my normal vocal track that just comes in on my template.
Isn't it crazy how we fall in love with every stranger we walk past?
So there's a lot happening in this track. We have a rhythm section, guitar, synths. I love the sound of those synths, but they are competing a little bit with the vocal. So there's a lot to think about here and a lot that we can fix with compression, believe it or not. So first, let's take a look at the vocal. So let's pull up Smart Comp 2. And this company does have a smart EQ that blew my mind when I tried it, and I'm excited to make a video of that in the near future. However, the Smart Comp, there's almost so much going on that it can easily become confusing. And the first look at this plugin, you can look at it, get intimidated, and never go back. Let's take a look at a vocal high. So we have a preset here, and we're gonna learn.
But when someone shows me interest, I want none. Am I damaged, or is there a possibility to mend?
Now there's something really interesting going on here. Real quick, it's time to say thanks to today's sponsor, Sweetwater. As you probably know by now, I really like Sweetwater. I live close, even before doing a YouTube channel where there was any relationship with them at all. Pretty much everything here was purchased at Sweetwater. I've had a very long, tried and true relationship with Sweetwater. I have used just about every aspect of them that you could imagine. Guitar setups, yep. Support when it comes to data recovery from a hard drive, yep. General questions and studio planning. When you're talking about something as large as a setup like mine, even though it's not the largest setup out there, don't get me wrong, but sometimes it is hard to wrap your head around what you need for your space. And it's hard to have somebody to trust enough to talk to give you a good answer on no, you don't need that. Maybe look at something like this. And I can't tell you the number of times that my sales engineer has talked me down from a high-end purchase to something cheaper where they would make less money on that sale, but it was better for me in the long run. And for that reason, I trust the people at Sweetwater to give me good advice when I have questions about something like that. On the plus side, you can purchase sonable plugins through Sweetwater. I'll post a link down below. Thank you, Sweetwater, for sponsoring. Back to the video. Here, so what can we see right off the bat? We have our ratio 1:7. That's a little light for me. However, this was sung into a phone. So there's probably a lot happening just on the algorithm with the phone itself. But if this were a raw vocal, that may be different. Attack, 20 milliseconds, release is set to auto. And our threshold is set so that we're getting just a little bit of compression. So let's take a look.
Holding on to hostility.
Now what we see down here is a spectral comp, and that's interesting. Let's turn that off for right now. So all we have is a compressor.
Understand why I'm holding on to hostility. Isn't it crazy how we fall?
Look over here on this side of the screen. Let's make this bigger. I love it. It scales. So we have kind of this layout of what is happening with our vocal. Where is the energy in this vocal? And if we change the threshold, how is that going to affect that vocal? So right here, with the threshold effectively high enough to not do a thing, you can see it's basically the vocal as we know it. As we bring that down, we can see that energy changing. What's this responding to? So we can see as we change the attack, with the waveform as it goes by, what are we doing to the signal?
Understand why I'm holding on to hostility.
You know, increase this attack time just a little bit.
Understand why I'm holding on to hostility.
So this is showing us we're going to have a little more energy right at the front of the vocal. Now, what we can do, we can squeeze the mid. This is where this thing starts to get really interesting.
Understand why I'm holding on to hostility. Isn't it crazy how we fall in love?
Like, how sensitive is this going to be to certain levels of the vocal? Do we want it to be responsive to the quiet parts? Do we want most of the energy down here is probably noise, so really we don't want it affected. However, maybe we want to drop the threshold.
Understand why I'm holding on to hostility.
And now we can start to hear it pump and really work. So what's going on with the spectral comp down there? So this is really interesting because we can see exactly how this attack is working. If we want to turn on our own release, we can see how that's working.
Understand why I'm holding on to hostility.
We can make this release crazy fast. If we want to make this kind of like an 1176 style thing, let's do like a 4-to-1, what I most use, and a medium attack quick release.
Understand why I'm holding on to hostility. Isn't it crazy how we fall in love?
It's going to let the initial part of that transient out. It's going to catch it, bring it down. We're going to compensate with that because we have auto gain turned on. This makes it very easy to see how everything is going to be affected in your vocal.
Understand why I'm holding on to hostility.
And you can quickly get a little too out of hand. But let's reset this. Let's go back to the learned parameters for this thing. So here we have like a normal sidechain where we can see here what is the compressor listening to do this. Right now we have a sidechain, but right now that's an internal sidechain.
Understand why.
So it's listening to its own source to compress. Maybe I don't want this to react to the low end, like a.
Understand why I'm holding on to hostility.
So therefore I would want to bring this down.
Understand why I'm holding on to hostility.
Starts to get really interesting here with what you can, not just what you can do, because a lot of these you can do with any other compressor, but it's what you can see that's happening to give you that real-time feedback of what am I actually doing when I turn these knobs. And yeah, this will translate to just about any other compressor that you could use. So let's move to something else. Let's move to the bass. Let's bring up Smart Comp on the bass. Now let's tell it we have a bass guitar, bass electric. Let's learn. So it wanted to grab the peaks of those bass, which I'm totally fine with. Let's lock it down. So we can see it brought in the spectral compression. What spectral comp is doing is it's seeking to even out the tone of something. If we have something really, really bright or really, really dark, it's going to try to balance that out. So if I set it to 0, it's just a normal compressor. If I turn it all the way up, it's now wanting to even that out. And so you can actually see it down here, like where that energy is. Where is it compressing? We have 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. If I have spectral all the way up, it's controlling that low end. So we can tell that low end is starting to get locked down, which is really cool. Spectral link. When it's on 0, there's full broadband compression happening to the entire thing outside the bounds. Now we don't have the bounds set right now. So if we have it set to 100, there's absolutely no compression going on. So let's get rid of the stuff that's not happening, not being compressed. And turn it up to 100. So now there's nothing being compressed on the top end of this bass. So if we wanted to really just lock down the low end of a bass guitar, we could totally do it. Let's go back to our mix now.
Smile or hold open, knowing it won't end up like the last.
Bridge.
We have all of these key parts and these synth parts, and I love the way they sound, but let's try something here. We're going to send this to a new track. Let's just call it keys. Make sure that's going to our instrumental. Let's go ahead and make this a folder, and we will drop the keys in it. That's just for housekeeping. Cool. So we have all of our keys in one spot now. So let's pull up Smart Comp. We're going to go to our vocal, and we're going to set up a sidechain here. Doesn't really matter. Let's say bus 4. Cool. So now it's going to send pre-fader. So it'll send whether or not we're listening to the vocal or not. Back up to our keys. We're going to set an external sidechain, and I'm going to turn that on to bus 4. Let's learn this. So what's actually happening here? It's ducking in relation to the vocal. So let's listen to the vocal at the same time.
In love with every stranger we.
So really what we want to do is have it learn a vocal. Let's try it again.
In love with every stranger we walk past.
Cool.
Is it the way they smile or hold open a door?
So now it is reacting to these keys in relation to the vocal. Now, if you remember, without this, these are fighting like crazy.
In love with every stranger we walk past.
Now, again, this isn't a final vocal take, but just for illustration purposes, I love the sound of these synths. I want them to be out there. I want them to be powerful. But I want them to back off when the vocal happens. So something really interesting we can do. Let's adjust our threshold here. Let's put this on full spectral stuff and make it dark.
In love with every stranger we walk past.
So we have it looking at the spectral layout of the vocal on the keys, and we have it set to dark. So what is happening every time the vocal comes in? It's gonna darken those keys for us. It's not gonna be crazy obvious through the rest of the mix because we can listen to any other part. So we have that bright thickness that we love out of this thing, and it only engages once she starts singing.
I was so hurt by the last guy.
And using our ratio and our threshold, we can decide how much we want it to react.
I was so hurt by the last guy.
Let's listen to it in the mix.
Don't understand why I'm holding on to hostility. Isn't it crazy?
So one of the other things we can do, we can go back to this vocal. Say we're compressing, we have our auto gain. Let's make it a little more dirty, something like an 1176 that I love out of it, to give it a little grit, make it pop out, give it that mid-forward aggression.
Don't understand why I'm holding on to hostility. Don't understand why I'm holding on to hostility. Isn't it crazy how we fall in love with every stranger we walk past?
And just for reference, let's listen to it without smart comp on the keys.
Don't understand why I'm holding on to hostility. Isn't it crazy how we fall in love with every.
It's just darkening those keys enough to make that vocal pop out without being crazy obvious. I'm not losing the mood. I'm not losing the vibe that I have set up. So interesting. The other cool thing we can do, let's make this snare pop, but I don't want to bring out the hi-hat. So let's tell it we have a snare. Cool. A little quick on the attack for me, but still, that's a really good start. Now, an interesting thing here, let's go with a noise gate on the compression template. And all of a sudden, this crazy versatile compressor has become one of the best drum gates that I've ever used. Again, this is not sponsored by Sonable. Now we can also set up something so that we make sure our drums pop through and don't argue with the bass. So let's go back to our bass. Let's change this key input to bus 3, which would be our drums. Let's have it listen for drum bus.
Don't understand why don't understand why I'm holding on to hostility. Isn't it crazy how we fall in love with every stranger we.
So real quick, we can just set up so that our bass in the low frequencies is looking at the spectral analysis of the drum set and ducking itself accordingly so that our kick and our bass aren't fighting. The more I get to play with Smart Comp 2, the more I like it. It can show you things about compression that you haven't quite wrapped your head around yet. If you are interested in Smart Comp 2 or anything like it, check out Sweetwater.com. I will post links to this, everything else Sonable makes. Again, Sonable sent me this to try, but it is not sponsored by Sonable. It is sponsored by Sweetwater. I'll post links to this and everything else I use in my studio in the description below. If you guys are interested, go download a trial of this. Just test it out. If you're confused by any aspect of compression, I'd be interested to know if something like this sheds light on any of those issues. Attack, release, sidechaining, spectral ducking. Super interesting stuff all in one little box here. I haven't even scratched the surface of what this thing can do yet. Anyway, guys, let me know. I'm super excited because it's even good for me to get refreshers on some of this stuff because I fall into habits when it comes to compression, but to actually see what's happening and react. I know we mix with our ears, but we can also sometimes learn what our habits are by using our eyes. And something like this is a good tool. You can only have so many 1176s or LA2As, but this fills a different gap for me. As always, hit like button if you like it, subscribe if you want to see more like this. I'm Resident Loser Jeremy. I'll see you in the next one.